First, though, it's been a bad-tempered week in the House of Commons, dominated by that row over David Cameron's tax affairs, and our MPs have been in the thick of it. Rutland and Melton MP Alan Duncan objected to personal remarks being made against the Prime Minister's background, although he didn't quite put it like that.
We risk seeing a House of Commons which is stuffed full of low achievers who hate enterprise, hate people who look after their own family, and who know absolutely nothing about the outside world.
And that was only the half of it. The beast of Bolsover, Dennis Skinner, got in on the act too, repeating an insult for David Cameron.
This man has done more to divide this nation than anybody else. He's looked after his own pocket. I still refer to him as Dodgy Dave.
And it was a comment that saw Dennis Skinner expelled from the chamber, and not for the first time. Well, we have spoken to Alan Duncan, the MP for Rutland and Melton, who told us that he hadn't meant to imply that people who aren't wealthy are low achievers. He says he was trying to make the point that class warfare in Parliament is putting talented people off from standing and also driving away some of those who are already there. Mark Spencer, whatever he meant, it's incensed people.
Yeah, and I think clearly he's clarified what he was trying to say, and I think we all benefit from having a broad church within Parliament with lots of people from different backgrounds, and we shouldn't put anybody off from trying to become a member of Parliament, whatever background you've come from, whether you're enormously wealthy or, frankly, just a normal, hard-working man or woman who's done a proper job.
Did he clarify it to your satisfaction, John?
Well, I've not heard him clarify it, but I entirely accept his clarification. Look, what I want to see in Parliament is more people from working class backgrounds get into Parliament. I want to see people who have been soldiers, who've been nurses, who've been teachers, who've also started their own business getting into Parliament. And I just worry that those comments from Alan, even if they were just clumsy, and let's give him the benefit of the doubt, I just worry that it sends a message that they're not welcome in Parliament, and that's not a message I want sent.
OK, it's a message that he doesn't want to send as well. That's what he's told us. John, do you think that Dennis Skinner went too far with Dodgy Dave?
Well, I didn't realise that calling the Prime Minister dodgy was unparliamentary, but look, Dennis Skinner's an institution, isn't he? And he's a great friend of mine, and I think Dennis made his point, and he certainly did. And he was making a more serious point about these Panama Papers, where the Prime Minister has insisted up until very recently that there was nothing suspect about his tax arrangements, and it turns out that he wasn't always being as straight with us as he'd led us to believe.
Did he go too far, Mark?
I think you don't serve in Parliament for that long without learning how to get the headlines, and I think Dennis is a master of having to work the media.
It was just to grab the headlines.
And clearly, we're still talking about it a week later, so hats off to him. He knows how to work the system. Well,
he was sent out for unparliamentary language, as we know, which is interesting sometimes, isn't it, given the sort of language that's bantered around the House between MPs. But there are some things that you can't say. Basically, it's down to the Speaker to decide. But here's a list of some of the name-calling that's been banned before. Gutter snipe, that's got a real edge to it, hasn't it? Gutter snipe. And, of course, there's the word of the moment, dodgy. Is dodgy really a dodgy word? How dodgy's dodgy?
I mean, I think the point is actually that you can have political debate without being rude to each other and without being insulting. And I think that not only applies to Parliament, that applies to life and to social media. I think we can have difference of opinion without actually being insulting.
OK, so don't take it too seriously is what you're saying?
Well, I think we need to do politics in a polite way.
OK. Well, there may be a few unparliamentary choice words in homes across the East Midlands tomorrow when parents find out which primary school their children have got into. But what kind of schools will they be going to? This week it was announced that 2 primaries in Nottingham will become the first in the region to have more than 1,000 pupils. So big changes on the way. Peter Saull's gone back to school to find out more.
Depending on how old you are, this might be your idea of what a primary school classroom should look like. It certainly feels cosy, and from the teacher's perspective, it's easy to stay in control.
While the boys dig for victory, the girls are putting in some spade work for the time when they'll offer unburnt offerings to their husbands.
Attitudes to schooling have changed a lot over the years, but from giant assemblies to prefab classrooms, it's always been a challenge to respond to a growing population. The solution nowadays, it seems, is for bigger and bigger schools. Fernwood in Nottingham is rated outstanding and will soon be one of the largest primaries in England. It's an important issue for these parents.
Ideally, we want it to be a bit bigger because we live just outside the catchment, so it just gives us a bit more chance of getting in. However, once he's actually in the school, there might be some issues like class sizes. I bet most of them will be over 30, so which is hard for the teachers to deal with.
Parking's a big issue. We just live around the corner from Fernwood, so that is a concern of ours, is the traffic situation. And then obviously my sons will hopefully be going in a couple of years, and then it's sort of class sizes and that sort of thing that we're thinking of.
With more than 800 pupils, this is already considered a super primary. And by September next year, it'll be one of 2 schools in the East Midlands to accommodate more than 1,000. In a few years' time, though, we might not consider schools like this to be so unusual. For local councils, expansion is their only option, as it's just free schools and academies that can be built from scratch.
It's silly because really councils have a legal duty to provide places, but we can't actually build new community schools. And the Local Government Association has highlighted this. They've written to government to say they think that councils should be given the powers back to build new schools. And that's not just the Labour group at the LGA, that's also from the Conservative group as well.
This is now a museum, and as pressure on the system grows, our traditional small primary schools could also become a thing of the past.
Well, we're joined now by Sheena Wheatley, who's the Nottingham Branch Secretary of the National Union of Teachers. Thanks for coming in, Sheena. Fernwood is an outstanding school. It already has 800 pupils. It's only going up to 1,000. Is that such a big deal?
Well, I think in an ideal situation, we would keep schools at slightly lower numbers than that. But we're not in an ideal situation, unfortunately, and there are a limited number of choices for the local authority. There's clearly demand in the local community, and I think that we need to respond to those demands.
Are you concerned that this is going to open the floodgates and we'll see a lot more primary schools supersising in this way?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I think that if anybody can make a really successful attempt at it, it will be Fernwood. But I also think that there needs to be some sense about how local authorities are allowed to manage schools. The situation is that at the moment they are not allowed to open on any new sites. I'm quite sure in these circumstances they would have chosen to open a site somewhere slightly different, which would still serve the needs of the local community. However, they don't have that choice, and I think certainly the NUT's position is a good local school for local children.
But you also feel there isn't an alternative. Mark Spencer, why won't the Conservative Party let local councils build schools? It seems that anyone else can set up an academy or build a free school, but not local authorities.
Yeah, which the City Council seem to be blocking for some reason. They don't want to see free schools in Nottingham. They've been specifically blocking that. But I think we're being distracted. Frankly, we're talking about bricks and buildings, and we should be focusing on results and attainment levels. That's what parents really want. And Fernwood is a very good example, actually, of where the attainment has been fantastic.
It's an outstanding school.
And parents are voting with their feet, and they are queuing up to get into this fantastic school.
But there are concerns, as you could hear in our film from parents there, worrying about the size of classes that there may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And clearly there is pressure in the system. We need to find new schools. The free school system actually is a great opportunity to get extra education into towns, and the academy programme is also a great opportunity.
This isn't either at the moment. It isn't an academy at Fernwood. But John, let's be clear here. Labour introduced academies. Presumably you'll be glad to see them expanding like this.
We didn't introduce them like this. Look, we've got a massive crisis in our education system at the moment. There's huge pressure on primary schools. We're seeing education budgets cut for the first time. That's their IFS just coming out on Friday. We're seeing teacher recruitment at lower levels. We're seeing retention at chronic levels. And the answer from the government is in a top-down academisation programme. It's just ideological. I agree with you. It should be about achievements and results. It shouldn't be about telling schools, telling them, not giving them the choice, telling them that they have to be academies. That is not the way forward. There are some good academies, there's some poor academies. They aren't always the answer.
What about supersising primary schools like Fernwood? I mean, we already have some of the biggest class sizes, not just in the country, in the world.
I mean, this is a voluntary system. You know, if you want to become an academy, you can transfer at the current rate of transfer. By 2020, all schools
there
will
are
be an
forced
academy
academies as well,
anyway.
You're
only forced to become an academy, let's be clear, if you're failing. And at the moment, you know, the really good schools are the academies.
That's not what the
I think we need to embrace that academisation and lift the results.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it should be about what's happening to our young people within the schools. There is no evidence to suggest that academisation is in any way a better system. Something like 44% of maintained schools are above the national average, and only 15% of academy schools are above the national average when it comes to looking at the data that the government itself focuses on. Locally, what we see is in the primary sector, our schools are over 80% good to outstanding. The vast majority of our primary schools are still within the maintained sector. Where we've got the real difficulties with academisation is that the secondary sector has taken a real hit in terms of exam results, and I think there are a number of reasons for this. One of the most important reasons is that this marketisation of schools means that they compete for staff, and we've got a huge recruitment retention crisis. I absolutely agree. Last year, 11% of teachers left teaching. That's 50,000 people who could teach decided they no longer wanted to.
Yes.
So we've got a recruitment retention crisis. We've got schools that compete for staff, compete for students. There are real issues with the white paper in terms of what's going to happen to our children who are most needy.
How do you answer these concerns, which are very real for teachers, and as Sheena says,
so we
are being
absolutely need to think
them.
about attainment and about results, and parents are voting with their feet. We need to support the really good schools who are getting to the right level, who are doing the right things, and pass the power from Whitehall down to those teachers and those governors who are running those schools.
Jon
And that's what
Ashworth.
academisation is about.
But you're not passing the power down. You're passing the power to multi-academy trusts, which I've got, where it's very difficult to hold them to account. Now, there's lots of Tory MPs who represent rural areas like you do, who are concerned about what this means for primary schools. Lincolnshire Tory Group, County Council Tory Group, has just come out and shredded this white paper. You've got schools in Calverton and places like that. You know, surely you should be speaking up and raising concerns about
that.
What we should be doing is concentrating on the results that those kids are getting, and we should be putting more cash into those schools and giving it to the teachers and the governors to spend, because they're on the ground floor and they know what's best, not someone sat in Whitehall.
Sheena.
I absolutely agree, but there is a real issue here. Since 1988 and the Local Management of Schools Act, schools actually have been quite independent in all sorts of ways. What the local authority's job was to do, and continues to be in some areas very important, is that they make sure that there is fair access for pupils from all different backgrounds and all different abilities, make sure that pupils with special educational needs are catered for properly and are funded correctly, and make sure that the local families have someone to go to through their local politicians or whatever to discuss any issues they have with school if they're not satisfied. Now, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, but what the white paper proposes is completely the wrong priorities, because if you look at academies, they are not delivering on results. They're not delivering on results, but the funding that they are taking in order to set up academies is huge.
And this is the problem, that everybody else seems to be focusing on bricks and mortar and process, and I'm the only one talking about getting the right results for those pupils.
I'm sure you're not the only one, and there are a lot of Conservative councils who have concerns about academisation
to lift
as well.
those results and give the power
Sheena,
to
we're going to have to leave it
Sorry,
there.
I need to make one more point about governors. The white paper says that they do not want parent governors on the governing bodies of schools. This is an attack on the democracy.
Okay, Sheena, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio. Now, a Derbyshire woman suffering from breast cancer who's fighting for the rights of terminally ill workers will see her campaign launched nationally in Parliament tomorrow. Two of our MPs from different sides of the political divide, including studio guest Jon Ashworth, will formally launch the Dying to Work campaign. It's aimed at closing loopholes in the law which can see terminally ill people forced out of their jobs. Helen McCulloch reports.
Imagine being diagnosed with terminal cancer. Then imagine being forced out of your job because of that diagnosis. It's a situation Jackie Woodcock doesn't have to imagine.
I was diagnosed with secondary breast cancer in 2012. I had had previous primary cancer, and it never occurred to me to actually not carry on working, although I was quite ill. And then my partner actually couldn't cope with the cancer, so our relationship became really quite bad. So work again was a really good distraction for me. I mostly worked in fabrics, so I was working for a textile company, and I loved my job. It was difficult going through the chemotherapy and everything, and literally just putting a wig on my head and going to work. And as it happened, my partner then left, so work became even more important really, for not just for dignity, it was stimulation, normality, but I also needed the money then as well. Work in a way kind of left me alone, because I think they just thought I was going to die, the same as I did. And when I didn't, HR then started to ask me very inappropriate questions.
Jackie could not believe what happened next.
She then phoned up my oncologist secretary, recorded the lady without her knowledge, and asked for all my chemo dates, my scan dates, and started to also ask for my hospital dates. And the secretary then realised she should not have given that information. At that point, I was beyond angry. I was just absolutely incensed that they felt they could intrude and do such a thing to anybody.
Despite her ongoing battle with cancer, Jackie is now taking on another battle, in the hope that others will not face the same treatment. She contacted her union and enlisted the support of her local MP.
I personally was determined that I was going to change the law, so I then went to my GMB. They took it to the TUC, and Pauline helped enormously, mentioning it in the Prime Minister's question time.
Well, I've had lots of questions from people on all sides of the House, and they've said, thank you for raising that. We've had a similar situation. We must do something about it. And I spoke to the Prime Minister, and he was shocked at what he'd heard. And the whole House, if you listen to the clip, the whole House is shocked by what's being said. And I'm sure that when we have the launch this week, there's going to be a lot of MPs coming along and signing the pledge.
I'm a very principled person. I thought this was terribly wrong, and I just knew I had to do something about it, even if it took up the rest of my time here.
Well, Jackie Woodcock's clearly a determined and rather remarkable woman, I'm sure you'll agree. Jon, you're helping to launch this important campaign tomorrow alongside your Conservative rival, Pauline Latham. It is an emotional issue, and is that why, do you think, it's garnering cross-party support?
Well, I mean, Jackie is an inspirational woman, and I've had the privilege of meeting her to talk about this campaign. It just struck me that when I heard the details, that I was amazed that there's no protections for people in the workplace who face these very sad and tragic circumstances, and that seems to me that is something which politicians on all sides of the argument can unite around and try and get legislation changed and try and get people more protections for people in the workplace when they're faced with this terrible situation.
So what is actually going to happen at the launch tomorrow?
Well, I think tomorrow is about raising the issue and giving it more of a profile, because there's a lot of colleagues who are not aware of the details and are actually shocked when they find out about it. I mean, you expect protections in the workplace for pregnancy and things like that, and just people are just amazed that there's no protections for people in these circumstances. So we want to raise the issue, and we want to build a campaign, and I think it's important that it's Conservative politicians and Labour politicians coming together. This is not a party political thing.
No.
If we can work together on this, hopefully we can change the law on it.
Mark Spencer, we did hear Pauline Latham there saying that she'd spoken to David Cameron on this issue. Are you signing up for this on Monday?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you can't help, can you, but feel sympathy for someone who's in that terrible position. And you would have thought that in the modern world today that employers would get that and would understand it. But I mean, clearly these circumstances need to be viewed as individual cases, because some people may clearly react differently or find they've got different health issues, and yeah.
It is shocking and it is astonishing, but how are companies getting away with this, Mark?
Well, I mean, to be fair, you know, if you're a very small company, so 50% of your staff sadly are diagnosed with a terminal illness, that clearly puts a lot of pressure on you as an employer and on the business, and you don't want to put the business in jeopardy. So you have to view these things as individuals and work with your employee. You know, I think you know, clearly in those circumstances, you should care enough about that person who's worked for you for a long time and find a solution that suits you both.
Do you think there'll be some resistance to this campaign from smaller businesses, as Mark just suggests?
Well, there may well be employers' organisations who are worried about what this means because, you know, when you introduce more rights for workers in the workplace, there are employers have to think about how that affects them and how they have to run their business. So, but you know, at this stage, I'm not saying it has to be done this way or that way. I'm just saying something needs to be done. And
so it's not about a change in the law.
Well, I want a change in the law, but you know, how that is implemented, you know, that is something which I think we need to engage in discussions and debate with, and hopefully we can move this forward.
And the first company that's actually signed up to this campaign is E.ON. And they employ 5,000 people here in the East Midlands. So that's a very positive start, isn't it, for a campaign of this nature? And presumably you'll be hoping that other companies will follow suit.
Yes, if we can get voluntary agreements, great. But I think in the long run, or the short to medium, you know, as soon as we can, we need to get the law changed. But you know, if we can't do that straight away, getting voluntary agreements from firms and companies is a positive step forward.
I mean, clearly those responsible companies are not the ones we need to get to. It's those that.
So it's about spreading the message.
Yeah, okay. and just trying to get that human message across.
Thank you.